Hi everyone, here is the Disruption Network Club, and we are very happy to welcome our audience and start our conference number 29, Smart Prison. I am Tatiana Bazzichelli, the director of the Disruption Network Club, and as usual, I would like to start thanking the team of the Disruption Network Club for the great work that they did to start this conference and to arrive to this point. So first I would like to thank Elena Velianowska and Özlem Kaya, Daniela Silvestrin and Sabrina Barcucci for the production, Lorin De Carli, the legal advisor and admin officer, Jonas Franchi, our press and design great person that did the animation that you just see. Then Agnese Trocchi and Alice Bazzichelli for the communication, and Cassie Thornton that's joined our team developing the community program that we started also this year before this conference. As I say, we are on streaming, and also we are here in Berlin at the Kunstquartier Bethanien, the Studio One. And the title of the conference is Smart Prisons, Tracking, Monitoring, and Control. In this conference, we are investigating systems of surveillance at prisons, detention centers, and borders, and also the effect of technological violence towards migrants, dissidents, and activists. I also want to say that when we mention the idea of smart prisons, we define it as a broad concept, a wide concept that is not only related to technology. And we will see through these 2 days and also through the workshop that we will have on Sunday, this idea of smart technology from one side connects, of course, to the use of AI and algorithms, but the other side also relates to an algorithm that is not merely technologically determined, but is based on a set of procedures that has been applied to generate oppression. And these kind of procedures go back a long time ago from many political situations that we will also analyze during this conference. So it's very important to say that we have to consider the idea of smart as not only in relation to technology, but also in relation to politics, to our practices, and try to deconstruct what technology is and bring it really directly connected to our everyday life. And I want to, first of all, say welcome also to the audience online that is joining as usual through the streaming. And I also thank our great streaming team that is Boiling Head Media. And so thanks Ranav that is doing this great job, and also his team. And I want to remind the people that are following online that we have the possibility to interact with our chat. So we have our team of the communication ready for getting your questions, your comments. So feel free to say what you think and also share resources and ask questions to the panelists when will be the moment. Then I would like to thank our funders and cooperation partners. In particular, the Senate Department for Culture and Europe from Berlin, Allianz Foundation, the Riva and David Logan Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, and this project is also part of a New Perspective for Action, that is a project by Reimagine Europe, co-funded by the European Union. This conference is also in cooperation with Global Voices and Airwars, and of course with our partner venue, Kunstenkreuzberg Bethanien, that is the institution downstairs. And I also want to thank our media partner, ex-Berliner, Taz, and Il Mitte. Especially, I want to thank Nadia Van Kauberge for the great work that she did at ex-Berliner. And this is also why we did this cooperation with her since 8 years. So thank you, Nadia, for the work that you did. And our outreach partners, Axioma, Don't Extradite Assange, and the Hologram. And speaking about the hologram, also I want to again thank Cassie Thornton that has been developing the discourse of the community with us. We started this year having a meetup before the conference that inaugurated the new series called Regular Disruptions. And this regular disruption, at a difference from the past, will be going on the whole year, before and after the conference. So important to say that we did an event that was called While People Sleep, Amazon Dreams. And we were already, through the great work of Cassie, investigating the vibe among the community in Berlin in relationship to this conference and bringing some questions from the people that were participating. And here in the audience, we have also 4 interlocutors that together with Cassie are joining the conference to follow it in the 2 days and the workshop day. And then we will have another event, the 12th of April, after the conference, in which we will bring the members of our community to discuss what we experience here. And this will be called People's Panel. Speaking then about the community, I would like to mention our membership program. That is something also we started this year. So there are some membership cards that people can get that bring very nice benefits. For example, coming for free to our conferences, getting to know before the events that we are doing, and other beautiful things that also we still have to invent, but you know, it's an ongoing process. But the idea is also that you have a really great discount on joining our program, and so I invite everyone to become members and also support the Disruption Network Club. And now we enter into the program of the days. We start today with a panel that is called Constellation of Offshore Detention. And in this panel, we are connecting different prisons and detention facilities, discussing extraterritorial spaces and geography that render humans stateless. And after this panel, we will have another panel that is called Are Algorithm and Borders the New Jailers? And the subject is related to different expertises that are bringing together the discourse of being targeted by right-wing trolls on the internet, technologies of violence and data infrastructure at borders, and the concept of borders itself as a dividing barriers. And tomorrow, also, we go on with a very important program, since we will speak about the 10 years long grassroots forensic investigation of Segreteria Legale, and in relation to the G8 of Genoa events of the 2001 in Italy. And we will also discuss experience that came after these events, as well as the police brutality and torture of protesters at Diaz and Bolzaneto prison. And finally, we will touch the discourse of the case of Julian Assange, having with us the wife of Julian Assange, Stella Morris, and also other great panelists that will discuss the persecution of Julian since more than 10 years, and also his case since he's still at the Belmarsh prison in UK, and as we know, the conditions are really terrible. And then we will have Sunday workshops. I invite you to register online. One is called ISIS Prison Break. That is about deploying open source and visual methods for investigation in cooperation with Air Wars. And then a follow-up workshop on the G8 of Genoa 2001, a grassroots media forensic toolbox. That I will say more about the workshop also later during the day. So we enter now into the depth of the panel that we are starting, that is called Constellation of Offshore Detention. The panel will welcome Adnan Softić, that is an artist, and Jens Kambeck, an attorney at law. And we will also have a video contribution from Sean Vegezzi. The idea of the constellation of offshore detention brings together different concepts of prisons and also special prisons in different countries and contexts. And the idea now is that I will introduce you the artistic work that is a short film from Sean Vegezzi. We will all watch the film, and then we will start the panel together with Adnan and Jens. So speaking about the work of Sean, it relates to the Vernon C Bain Center, also called VCBC, that is a floating detention facility in New York. At the same time, we will connect this facility to the Billy structures in Hamburg, and also the example of the airport procedure for asylum seekers in Germany. So this is the offshore detention facility that we will discuss. But now to introduce specifically the work of Sean, I would like to mention the importance that we will also find again in the work of Adnan of imagining art as a tool and as a mean to produce evidence, evidence of what is hidden. And this connects with the discourse of art as evidence that we at the Disruption Lab have been developing since many years now, with the idea of art that is able to expose facts and also wrongdoing to transfer these issues emotionally. So in this idea, we will see that art is actually able to create a debate and to foster literacy about subjects that need to be brought into light. And the idea is also to reflect on how we can apply to this a broader notion of technology. So we will see that, especially for this panel, the idea of smart prisons also gets into a in a conceptual realm. And Sean Vegezzi is a New York artist that developed a new video project commissioned by the Disruption Network Lab. He's an artist and researcher who has examined urban topographies and infrastructure through various formats. And as I said before, his work is focusing with now specifically on the Vernon C Bain Center. This prison is a 800-bed, 191-meter floating detention facilities that is moored in the East River of the South Bronx in New York. And this functions as an auxiliary of the Rikers Island jail complex and is the primary facility for the criminal court in the Bronx. So unfortunately, Sean is not with us today, but if you also want to hear his perspective on the subject, last November we created an event with him and Fiamma Montezemolo that was called Opening Prisons, where he introduced the ongoing work that he was preparing with us. And in particular, in this episodes, he showed a very great video that he did together with Laura Poitras that is called Edgelens, VCBC, that is related to the facility that I just mentioned, and it specifically is investigating a public health crisis inside the vessel during COVID-19, and they intercepted radio transmission from the prison staff. And this film is also very important to watch because you can hear what is happening inside the prison. Then Sean developed his research further and he started to do the production with us. And this new video work is based on the discovered material related to the construction of VCBC in the archives of Avondale in Louisiana. And the focus on the Avondale shipyard is also very interesting because through this work it's possible to understand who were the stakeholders behind the construction of this prison. And specifically also because it's very difficult to access this archive, since this archive has been then completely destroyed during the Hurricane Katrina. And this video that we can see now is also featuring some part of an archive that is showing the vessel christening ceremony in 1991 in Louisiana. And seems to be also the only surviving video of the ship's christening. The ships then reached New York in 1992 and is where is it today. And of course, what to say about this ship is that this connects with the title of the whole panel, is related to the total offshore obscurity, because there is not so much information about the ship. The only people that spoke about it are the people that were inside as prisoners, and it's very difficult so to find documentation about it. The ship is supposed to be closed within 2027, but of course this is also a political matter, so let's hope will be the case. And in relation to that, I would like to mention, before watching the film, the fact that from the Disruption Letter Club, we would like to thank the community Take Back the Bronx for their work. Is a grassroots organization that is actively supporting the detainees within the floating detention facility, and is asking to close this facility. And so we are also thinking to open this panel in solidarity with their work, and also to say that we also stands with their struggle against the existence of the VCBC, and also to fight for prison abolition at large. Thank you, and now we will watch the film, and then I will call on stage our panelists.
Good morning. On this beautiful day, I would like to welcome everyone to the launching of the floating detention facility, Vernon C. Bain, on this magnificent day. Avondale was the successful bidder on this project in January 1989. In what you might say international competition. We are very proud to have been awarded the contract for this unique facility by the City of New York. We also look forward to the fact that this may be a forerunner to similar facilities in the future. I would like to take a moment to recognize certain individuals here today who have been closely associated with the construction of this facility. I'd like to introduce Chief Warrant Officer Donald Joyner. There we go. Donald's he's the resident inspector with the 8th Coast Guard District. Mr. Joe Fortin, Principal Surveyor, American Bureau of Shipping. Mr. Mike Simpson, Group Vice President, Avondale Industries. Mr. Carol Danos, Assistant Vice President, Avondale Industries. Mr. Cliff Boudreau, Project Manager, Avondale Industries. And Mr. Buddy Roberts, Ship Superintendent, Avondale Industries. It further gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. John Shanahan, who is with us today. Mr. Shanahan is the Assistant Commissioner, Department of Correction for the City of New York. John.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the people of the City of New York. I thank you all, each and every one of you, for the work that you do on this vessel, for the many, many hours of labor that you put in to make this construction effort possible. One of the things I have to do in building facilities for the City of New York is I have to turn them over to the important guys who operate these things, who are the, if you will, the owners of the facilities when they all get done. And in this case, the owner and his chief deputy are here. Let's say hello, if you would please stand up. Bob DeRosa and John Walker, deputy and warden and deputy warden for the facility. What I'd like to reflect upon you with this morning is what you do in the way of a total commitment to make this project happen, to put this vessel in the water, and then ultimately to sail it to New York so that we may open it and operate it as the very first built from the ground up, designed from the ground up, floating detention facility in the United States. What you're here for this morning is to keep a commitment. We have entered into agreement, the City of New York and yourselves, this wonderful shipyard. You did something that nobody has ever done before. You have designed this vessel and you have built it. And you can go from one end of this country to the other, from here to Europe, to Asia and back again. And you will not find another vessel like this. This is the only one there is, designed and built as it is, on the face of this earth. It is going to New York to perform a difficult and a necessary job, because we in New York have to keep our commitments to preserve the public safety of the City of New York. You are helping us keep those commitments.
gentleman right here.
Okay.
Person D, Vernon C, Bain.
Bain. Okay. Before I hit it. All right.
Right into the mic.
Okay.
And then just step back.
All right.
And he's gonna give you the signal, the guy in the green jacket.
Okay, when he tells
When
me
he
to
says go, and you say it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can I say it now?
Go ahead and say it.
Okay. I christen thee the Vernon C. Bain.
So now we can start with our panel. Thank you, Sean Vegezzi, for your film. We saw that unfortunately the journey of this ship started with a bad luck since the bottle didn't break immediately. I don't know if you know this. I would say already show the history coming. So, and I'm happy to introduce now in the panel Adnan Softić and Jens Kambeck. Please join me here. Thank you. So I will start introducing you, Adnan, with your presentation. Then we will create a connection conceptually on these kind of floating detention centers and facilities that are somehow very easy to move, replace, and kind of enter into obscurity. Adnan Softić is an author, visual artist, and a director. He studied film and aesthetic theory at the University of Fine Arts of Hamburg, where he also taught as a professor of film and time-based media. He's dealing with the historical and remembrance politics issues, exploring the relationship between architecture and violence, language, and history as a form of suppression, phenomena such as exile, extraterritoriality, invisibility, and non-knowledge. And Adnan is here both because he's a really great artist that does a very important work, as we said, in relationship to architecture and violence, but also because he lived in one of these floating centers, especially a floating accommodation barge that was called the BB Challenge, that was set up by the German authorities on the river Elbe in Hamburg to accommodate refugees fleeing the Bosnian War in this case. And he will also show a video excerpt of the BB Challenge, but now I don't say more, I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's very important to me to be brought into this context. The work is kind of old, but still it is still becoming more and more important, sadly. Maybe you can show the image. Thank you. Yeah, my work, which I would like to present here, deals with extraterritorial spaces, places. They are, roughly speaking, made for unwanted people. My focus will be on the refugee ship BB Challenge, on which I myself had to live for a time as a refugee in Hamburg, and from which I would like to report today. Freely described, BB Challenge, it is a cross between a cruise ship and a container ship, a kind of improvised home on the water that the German authorities have set up in Hamburg to house refugees and asylum seekers. These mobile housing units can be easily deployed, dismantled without a trace, or simply relocated as needed. The ship I lived on, BB Challenge, floated along with 3 other residential ships, BB Stockholm, BB Kalmar, BB Altona, on the Elbe River. At that time, that was still an industrial area, not far away from the city beach. The charter contract between the German authorities and BB Line, a shipping company from Liverpool, lasted for 13 years. Between 1993 and 2006, refugees lived there on 4 floors. One floor had about 115 rooms. Depending on the size of the family, the rooms ranged from 9 to 18 square meters. The general condition of the ships visibly suffered over the years. In some of the refugee ships, the windows could not be open. There were constant problems caused by a complete lack of infrastructure, and there were also concerns for the environmental authority. According to an employee of the Hamburg administration, the effort was immense, but the result was zero. The boats were always overcrowded and not safe for children. Personally, I know of a case where a child fell into the water while playing soccer and suffered permanent brain damage. The BB Challenge officially closed on September 28, 2006. The charter agreement with the BB line expired on December 31, 2006. But nevertheless, the city decided to charter a new residential ship in 2015. 5 years later, it was closed due to similar problems. No matter what happened, our BB Challenge could not be broken. It was completely refurbished and is now used as a floating mobile hotel for offshore companies. Inside there are now 337 fully air-conditioned rooms with showers, restaurants, a bar, various fitness, games and recreation centers, rooms. But let's briefly go back to my personal experience there. Maybe it's interesting to hear also that perspective. At first, we stayed in a small hotel, which I was quite comfortable with. Then, when the news came that everyone had to move to a ship immediately, we all felt very uncomfortable. We heard that the ship was made of asbestos to make it fireproof, and that worried us quite a lot. We found out that the city paid the shipping company, BB Line, 800 Deutschmark for a 10 square meter room. At that time, we could have rented a large 3-room apartment in the center of Hamburg for that money. Or we could have had a big room in a villa by the sea or in a hotel with breakfast. In any case, we asked the authorities if we could find an apartment ourselves with that amount of money, but we couldn't. Why not? They didn't tell us the reason. Even today, it's the same. During our research in 2015, we found out that the 12 square meter room of the residential ship Transit costs about 2,000 euros. That was the equivalent of a large apartment of at least 120 square meters in a central location, including all utilities. When I was on the ship, I just wanted to get away from there because somehow it was clear to me that they were keeping us there to concentrate us, to control us, and ultimately to be able to deport us more quickly. At first, we were spread out in many small hotels and private homes, and that was kind of good. But then the question came up, why are they gathering us all together now? They could, for example, in a clandestine operation, simply rope off the ship and then sail towards the Adriatic Sea while we are all sleeping. And such frightening thoughts really did exist. The room was, as I said, about 10 square meters for 2 people. We had arranged the beds in L shape so that we could also use it as a corner sofa. In addition, we had a table and 2 chairs as well as a wardrobe. We were not allowed to hang anything on the walls, so we put everything under the beds. For example, we had drawn a sketch showing the arrangement under the bed. In the back, on the left, cigarettes, then next to it, pots, literature, and so on and so on. It was terrible time for me there. I was living in a tunnel and just wanted to get out. I remember that the man had a heart attack, apparently because he didn't feel well on the ship. There were also rumors of seasickness, and you really could feel life on the water. There were high and low tides, 4 times a day, each time up to 6 meters difference in height. The door and the locker door always open suddenly. We were only one community on the BB Challenge, which is different to the other ships. They were more mixed. Many lived with their families, and there was a nice degree of mutual social control. There was a sense of caring for the neighborhood, and that was very pleasant. Sometimes someone would knock on our door to give us a plate of some delicacy. We would continue the game by not returning the plate empty. At the entrance, there was a very unpleasant security service. Like in prison, no one was allowed to visit me more than 2 hours. As a deposit, they kept the ID cards of our guests. I have a vivid memory of the windy, humid, cold weather around the ship. And on the ship, I also realized for the first time in my life that I could survive on 4 hours asleep a day. My attempt to run away finally worked. After about 6 months, I think I found a very small room in a Hamburg villa district for 215 Deutsche Mark. And many years later, this life experience continues to preoccupy me, and now as an artist, I have a different interest, of course, also to observe this, and I'm interested in possible historical and social context to which the BB facilities can be linked. I find it interesting how it reflects the self-image and the idea of the state. And it is a perfect example how the state literally takes the ground out from under the feet of the unwanted people in order to prolong their insecure status in every sense of the word. There is a very interesting dichotomy with 2 well-known motifs also there, the refugee and water. But this time, this combination of motifs does not appear in the Mediterranean Sea, which is now mutated into the kilometer-thick invisible wall of Europe. But here it appears in a new form, as a floating houses, merely leaning against the city, often in industrial areas. And in example of the New York facility, next to sewage treatment plant and with a beautiful view on the Manhattan skyline. These mobile housing units can be easily deployed, dismantled without trace. And this tracelessness is also a very interesting aspect when I'm thinking about unwanted and undesirable people. Some of us, and with us, by us I mean human in generally, will leave behind beautiful ruins, and the others will leave just ruins. But in this case, there are no traces at all. And therefore, the unspoken goal for total invisibility of those people is implemented more and more completely. And the land mutates more and more into a fortress. On one side, we have solid ground, and on the other side, the floating, swimming ones, who, similar to a ship, can leave only short keel traces in the water. For Nina Softić, my partner, and me, it was also interesting to understand the whole thing as a non-narrated maritime theme. The museums and the villas of rich trader families, they are also called pepper sacks or Pfeffersäcke in Hamburg, are full of maritime motifs of Hamburg harbor, but BB facilities, you certainly can't see them there. Finally, I would like to show a short excerpt from a video work, which is a fragment of a larger body of art installation with objects, photos, sounds, and video. And maybe before, I would like to say on the visual level, you can see the footage of the BB facility given to me by a great activist, Marilis Straux, and my private footage is interacting with other historical images. And on the audio level, you can hear an artificial created background of harbor sounds. But if you listen closely, you can tell that there are cleaning sounds, vacuuming, mopping, and other cleaning stuff. Because back then, almost everyone on the ship was employed somewhere in the cleaning service. The whole situation had something strangely symbolic. We, refugees from the ethnic cleansing, were already treated as a dirt and parasites in our home country. Now we are only allowed to live on the water and have the task of keeping everything clean on land. We cleaned their houses and their business and slept on the water at night so as not to contaminate their land with our presence. The dichotomy of motifs, refugee and water reached additional level of meaning here. Here is no longer really clear who and what is clean and who and what is dirty. Maybe you can show the image. Thank you.
Hör mal, wir fließen doch alle. Wir schwimmen doch auch. Auch hier hat man keinen festen Boden unter den Füßen. Sogar hierzulande hat man weder eine Arbeit noch eine Wohnung für immer. Möbel sowieso nicht. Freunde und Familie sehr oft auch nicht. Das Beständige an der Heimat, das Feste an ihr, die Gewohnheiten, sind nicht festzuhalten. Die Festung und alles, was fest an ihr war, ist seit langem eingestürzt. Das Heim ist in der Krise. so gesehen sind wir alle Vertriebene, oder? Schau, die Bibis legen ab. Wer könnte wissen, ob Vertriebene ein Hindernis bedeuten?
Sind sie uns ein Klotz am Bein oder bedeuten sie Entwicklung?
Wie deuten, wie damit umgehen? Wir schwimmen.
Alles schwimmt. Thunfisch, Haifisch, Sardinen, im Eigensaft, Kakao, Kaffee, Tee, Kochbananen, Jasminreis, Olivenöl, Palmöl, Körperöl, Erdöl, Coltan, Aluminium, Kobalt, Diamanten und Gold.
Schiffe mit Waren und Stoffen aus aller Welt stoßen mit ihren Wellen die Bazzichelli an. Es ist schwer zu sagen, wer hat wen als erstes besucht. Wir sie oder sie uns. Wer wird von wem bedient? Wer ist bei wem ständig zu Hause?
Thank you, Adnan, also because you brought a very personal story. So really thanks from all of us for sharing that we also imagine it's not easy to go back to the past, although it's a long time ago, but still. And also thank you for your really wonderful video contribution. Then we will have time to discuss more in depth about this. Now I would like to introduce Jens Kambeck. Jens Kambeck is an attorney at law and partner at the law firm Kambeck and Partners. The law firm is located in Frankfurt Main and Berlin and works mainly in civil law with a focus on art law and the law of development cooperation. Kambeck served as legal advisor for the UN, the EU, NGOs, and National Development Agency. He worked in West Africa, East Africa, Far East, and in the MENA region. Now I will leave the word to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. I was a bit late when I came into the conference, so I had not too much time to prepare, but I was asked to contribute a bit legal theoretical aspect and hold with me, even if it's boring legal stuff, but I'll try to open up a bit the understanding of where does prison come from. Oh, pardon. Do you remember the first contract that you ever entered into? Most likely not. Most likely not. It was in the moment when you were born. It's the social contract. It's the idea of citizen and state. And we all entered into these contracts in the moment where we were born. This is the fiction of having a contract with the state. So you hand over your monopoly of power to the state, and in return, the state protects you. So this is the social contract. Rousseau, Montesquieu, this is where it all comes from, Enlightenment, this is where we all started. And people up till now defend the consequences of these contracts or of the philosophy behind it, because that's the division of powers, the separation of powers, quite important. And if we take this as a starting point, then whenever this contract is breached by any party, prisons come into one. Because this is the moment where you enforce one side or the other. So the state is acting as someone who is who's safeguarding your freedom, and that's the moment where the state also enforces its decisions against your will. And we do have different concepts of legal bodies, which you can find here: international law, state law, customary law, and religious law. And all of these legal bodies can be differentiated by why exactly do we obey to these rules? Where does that come from? Why is that legitimate? And the other aspect of differentiating between these legal bodies is, why do I have to obey these rules? Where does that come from? So in international law, it's quite young. This is where we started after the Second World War. And it's international contracts between states that allow the state or the states to communicate and to trade. So this is the legitimization, this is where it comes from. And do we enforce legal decisions on that level? Not really. We have international courts, we have international, but even these international courts are in a very early stage. And just last week we could hear that the US is not supporting international courts when it comes to war crimes in the context of Ukraine war, because they just fear that this could turn against themselves in the moment where even American soldiers could be investigated on the grounds of war crimes. We have the normal state law. This is law as we know it. Yeah? So this goes back to the separation of powers. There we have a parliament that is deciding on the law. That's the lawmaking part of it. And we do have, in the separation of powers, we have prisons playing an important role to enforce the legal decisions. We also have customary law. And why do we obey these laws? Because it's a part of repetition that is ongoing. And this is playing also a part that's playing a quite important part when you come to other parts of the world. In Europe, it's not that important. But in other parts of the world, especially when the state is decreasing its influence on the people, then customary law pops up and is the next level, and it's quite vivid in many areas. And last but not least, we have the religious law, and this is actually where prisons started in some ways. We have still now, if you connect the words, cells, die Zellen eines Mönches. Yeah? So the monasteries were places where people were separated from the crowd. And we have similarities in the wording here on many levels. So the point here I wanted to make is all legal systems that we find, and we have that's called a legal kite. Yeah? These are the 4 elements of law, 4 legal bodies. They all use coercion, they all use pressure to enforce legal decisions, and prisons play a role in all of them. The next part that I would like to introduce you to is we can't really talk about prisons without mentioning Foucault and the very elementary book, which has as a subtitle the birth time of prisons, surveillance and punishment. So Foucault tells us the story of the concept of sovereign power. This is where it all comes from, the sovereign power. And in the sovereign power, we have the state acting as the cruel, the cruel institution that will punish with pain. And we have the state as the, let me quote him here, we have the state as the sovereign power, the force that has the act of punishment is done on the body. It's bodily harm. This really is an important and crucial moment to harm the body in front of the public audience. This is where it comes from, and he argues this is transformed step by step, and we do no longer have the sovereign state now as the imperative here. We do have the disciplinary state. So discipline is a mechanism of power which regulates the behavior of individuals in the social body. And this is done by regulating the organization of space, of time, and people's activity of behavior. It's enforced by the complex systems of surveillance. Foucault emphasizes that power is not discipline, rather discipline is simple one way in which power can be exercised. He also argues that the term disciplinary society, discussing its history and its origins in disciplinary institutions such as prisons, hospitals, asylums, schools, and barracks. So the next important book that I thought is worth mentioning in this context is Byung-Chul Han, who says in his work on the Burnout Society in 2010 that we are now entering the next level. We come from the sovereign to the disciplinary concept, and he argues in his book Burnout Society from 2010 that this journey continues, and we are on our way from the disciplinary society to the achievement society, to the Leistungsgesellschaft. And we do no longer obey as subjects, we exploit ourselves. So this is the moment where it is a technical issue. Tech comes in, and Byung-Chul Han says, today's society is no longer Foucault's disciplinary world of hospitals, madhouses, prisons, barracks, and factories. It has long been replaced by another regime, namely the society of fitness studios, office towers, banks, airports, shopping malls, and genetic laboratories. 21st century society is no longer a disciplinary society, but it's rather an achievement society, Leistungsgesellschaft. Also, its inhabitants are no longer obedient subjects, but achievement subjects. They are entrepreneurs of themselves. So the question here comes up is, are we just getting smarter, or do we just give up more rights? And this is the tendency that I would like to describe here. The more technical it gets, the more easy we give up our individual rights. As an example, the Germans might still remember the Volkszählungsboykott, 1983, where only asking the people questions was challenged from in the Constitutional Court, and it said, if you have a set of questions that ask you such questions that are in a certain context that allow you to trace back who was asked and what is your personality. So that's the birth time of data protection in Germany as such, and the Constitutional Court said very clearly that there are strict limits to that. And if we compare the time of 1983 with Volkszählungsboykott on the one side, if we compare that with the situation today, we really came a long way in giving up our rights, being more technical and being less and less cautious on protecting our own rights here. Now, let us have a look in the reality in Germany. I assembled some facts and figures. In the year 2007, we had 65,000 people in prison in Germany. In the year 2020, it was 46,000 people. So it's a decrease of 30%. We have 30% less people in prisons in Germany now. More than 30% of these people in prisons are foreigners. And the ratio male-female is that even as suspects in the polizeiliche Kriminalstatistik, we still have about 25% female, and when you compare this with the numbers in the prison themselves, only 6% of female in prisons in Germany. So prison in Germany is a male-dominated thing. Suicide rates in Germany are about the average in Europe. It's about 100 in 100,000 committing suicide, and for the females, it's about 50 in 100,000 committing suicide. So the female suicide rate is growing, but nobody really investigated that further, and it's still to be found out where that comes from. So if you look at the law that governs prisons in Germany, this is also not too old. It goes back to the 70s, where it was the state arguing that it is a special situation of power between the state and the prisoners, and this is enough and absolutely okay. We do not need a law. It's absolutely okay to define such a special relationship of power between the state and the citizens to lock people up. And then it was the Bundesverfassungsgericht again, the Constitutional Court in Germany, that said, no, we need a proper law for this. And so das Strafvollzugsgesetz, the law that governs the time in prison, was set in place in the 70s. And I quote here from Article 3, which I find quite it's the principle of prisons in Germany. I'm having people in prison in Germany. Life in penal institutions should be approximated as far as possible to general living conditions. 2, any detrimental effects of imprisonment shall be counteracted. And 3, imprisonment shall be so designed as to help the prisoner to reintegrate himself into life at liberty. So this is the situation where we come from. Now, in the third part, I'd have a look at different procedures and different prisons around the world. Something that Adnan, when we talked before, and that you described in the vessel that you've been in, reminded me of the so-called Flughafenverfahren. It's a procedure that we have in Germany since the 1990s. And that's the situation. Have you seen that before? So you enter, you land in Frankfurt, or you land somewhere, and you are welcomed by the federal police. And their job is to screen and see, is there someone who's entering Germany without having a passport, for example. Yeah? in that, and that's by the way, that's the key for these Flughafenverfahren, for these procedures at the airports, because there's the fiction that people have not yet entered Germany. So you're kept at the airport in special facilities, and then there is a so-called speedy trial, 19 days maximum, and in 19 days you can ask for asylum. You will be checked, you will be screened, you will be interviewed, and there will be a final decision, which is very difficult for you to challenge. And this Flughafenverfahren were, when I was a law student in Frankfurt, I worked for Amnesty International for asylum seekers, and I worked with people in these Flughafenverfahren, and I was introduced into this situation of a prison or a facility that works as a prison, and that was at that time already very, very far away from the reality of what it wanted to do. Yeah? The reality was that people were often re-traumatized, traumatized in that context. People were fleeing and were refugees, getting away from public authorities, and then they were confronted with public authorities again. So there was a lot of difficulties in all kinds of levels. And this Flughafenverfahren came up again in the last weeks, because Europe is arguing we have to, as European Union, we have to defend the outer borders of Europe. So what comes up? The idea of speedy trials, of pre-screenings somewhere outside on the border of Europe. If you look into the reality of Flughafenverfahren, I can highly recommend Pro Asyl and their work on these expert opinions that they made on the Flughafenverfahren. It speaks a very clear language that these kind of procedures will not work well as blueprints for what Europe is planning to do at the outer borders. Now, another prison situation that I worked in Yemen for some years, and I had once the chance to visit a Yemeni prison where it was quite fascinating to see what the difference between prisons as I knew them in Europe and prisons in a Yemeni context. I visited one prison that was actually a private prison done by a sheikh who on customary law basis imprisoned people. I remember a conversation I had with someone who said, okay, what is your type of prison? And I explained the situation that we have in European prisons usually. And he said, okay, so that's not a prison, that's a hotel. And he said very clearly, this is not the idea of a prison. There is no punishment involved. People can sleep, people can sit, people can, they are entertained. They have all kind of positive aspects that they were feeling were so far away from the idea of prison. Later on, we talked about homes for elderly people, and then the same person came to me and said, that's a prison. You're far away from being kept with your family. This is what I see as a prison. I also wanted to mention that in the south of Yemen and in the north of Yemen, we do have prisons that are that are in the context of the brutal war that is happening in Yemen, are used as torture facilities, this plays a very terrible role there. Another aspect I want to mention here, and I'm running out of time, is ending with a positive idea. If you compare prisons worldwide, one of the very good examples is Norway and the Nordic countries. Imagine being a correction officer in Norway takes you to a university first. You have to study for 2 years. You are psychologically trained. And then, for the first time, you work in a facility. But the idea of resocialization, of bringing people back into society, is seen as so important that all the correctional officers working in prisons play a role as mentors. Their job is to support people. Their job is to advise people on how they can get back into society, what kind of things they should learn, what kind of certificates they should have. And if you compare then in numbers, the success of such a way and such an individual and psychological training of people working in such facilities, it speaks to itself. That's the happy note I wanted to end with. And if we ask about smart prisons, the human factor, that's what I think is the smart aspect of a prison. And I very much like to study the situation we find in the Nordic countries. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jens. Now I would like to ask you some questions and then open to the audience. My first question is for Adnan, especially in relationship to the discourse that you mentioned, that the mobile housing units you show to us can be easily used when required, also dismantled without leaving a trace, and also easily relocated. That was also what was challenging you the most. And I wanted to ask you, what is left of the Billy structure in Germany? Is there still something in Germany? And the facility in which you were, also what happened to it?
Yeah, this is a good question. What is left? I mean, there are still some attempts to create such infrastructure in Germany. For me, it was also interesting to understand that even though the experience with BB facilities was so bad, they have decided to do the same thing 10 years later or 9 years later. So that means there is some political push or will to create such a structure. And also for me, what is interesting to acknowledge how expensive it is to create extraterritorial space. And this also may be part of some political agenda, especially from the right wing, I think. And for example, the unnecessarily high costs of housing refugees it's suggesting somehow that we have to be restrictive in case of inviting migrants to come into the land because it is expensive. Also, the huge sums are creating a false image of taking care or of refugees or being concerned of refugees. And this is also interesting because this money, they are paying these facilities. Refugees are not receiving anything out of this money. And this can also lead to development of xenophobia, racism, and so on, because people think the whole money goes to the refugees. And also, I mean, the last thing, what I want to say, that there is a necessity from this perspective to build these structures, is also that the fact that I think it's more to build such a thing is more profitable than to build a hotel, because I don't know, it's overbooked for so many years, it's overpriced and so on. So it's a win-win business from certain point of view, I mean right wing. So, but on the other side, fortunately, there are also people who are against it, fighting it. So luckily, 2020, the other ship, refugee ship, had to leave Hamburg. So, but I think that this story is not finished yet.
Thank you. And Jens, I also have a question for you. What is the connection among the prisons that you visited in relation to the topic of this panel, the constellation of offshore detention? And what is the role of the that invisibility plays in such context? That you were also telling me the case of a prison in a bridge in Yemen that I don't think you mentioned. Yeah, if you would like to reflect on this.
Prisons, I've been working in about 12, 13, 14 countries, and I think in all of the countries I managed to somehow visit prisons. Sometimes it was related to my work, and sometimes I just had the chance to do it. It's not that I have a bizarre fetish and like to be in prisons, no, but I think it's just a very, very, very interesting place. It's a place where psychology plays such an important role, and what they all have in common for me is it's an acoustic event, and a prison is just a very, very acoustic place. So I'm a very acoustic person, so this is a sense that works very well for me, and this locking down and opening and so this is something that all prisons for me had in common. Let's say the power, the structure of power and of being powerless is so obvious. It is visual, but it's also very, very acoustic. And asking people in very modern facilities, for example, do you want to just get away from this sound of locking up and have it completely digitalized? No, actually no. There's a technical aspect of it, so you shouldn't really want to be sabotaged or being able to be sabotaged on a technical level. You really want to lock it up, but this is also a way of separating people and of making the power misbalance very, very clear.
And so that example that you were telling me, I found it very interesting. Would you like also to bring it to the audience?
The one with the bridge?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think that was also very connected with the topic of the offshore detention.
One quote-unquote famous prison in Lebanon, in Beirut, is a prison in Adliyeh Circle. It's a central place in Beirut. And this is a kind of facility in a bridge. So it's in the let's say in the pylon, in the columns of that bridge, and there are cells in that bridge. And it was at the beginning I asked where does that come from, and it is located close to a central office of the Central Security. Then it was used as a place where domestic workers and also refugees found a place, and where they were kept. And a quite brutal argument that I heard was that this is kind of used to also protect the vital infrastructure, because you would not sabotage a bridge if you know that your own people or the people that you're connected to are kept in such a bridge. So it was in different stages. It had very different and very cruel aspects of how a public infrastructure is used and misused as a prison or as a place to keep people locked up.
And Adnan, also I have another question for you. We were also having a lot of conversation on this idea of calling this conference smart prisons, but also connecting it with this broader notion of technology that is just not merely connected with technical devices. And you were telling that you think in relationship to these offshore detention facilities, we are speaking more about a specific, not really about a technological application, but more a discourse of systemic knowledge that is a technique of border demarcation, and also like an algorithm that is more of a structure on society that is applied on people. And would you like to tell us a bit more about this?
Because I don't think that understanding technology that is only linked to technological devices or applications is really helpful in the context of understanding of controlling and monitoring of society. I think that the essence of algorithms was already established before the introduction of AI and I don't know, other digital systems of controlling people. And for me, it's much more interesting to think the digital before the digital in terms to understand, in order to better understand the development of current processes and also to put them in some historical line. And for example, the term extraterritorial is also somehow related to the concept of the digital 0 and 1. There is a territory on one side which belongs to certain people, and from the other side there are those who cannot belong to it. So the number 1 means all the system, which includes democracy, having right to vote, other rights and duties, and so on. And the zero is, that means the absence of the 1. But there is also something else. The 0 is becoming with time something, the system itself. And for example, in case of Guantanamo, this is very interesting, which was created by the U.S. government, which is which is the one. Human rights suddenly no longer have to be binding, and this is a very interesting movement, and especially against the background of universal human rights. I would say such a concept of 0 should not exist at all. But today we have the opposite. The 0 is expanding rapidly in all possible forms. You were telling some examples with Frankfurt airport and so on. I would also say BB is sort of that development. So that this is for me the link. And maybe the only difference is that the digital, I understand the digital or electronic devices or AI only as a type of it's a rapid acceleration of everything. So the things are changing more rapidly.
And Jens, I see that you were probably, do you want to comment this? I see you were agreeing, I mean, if you want, you can do it, but also I have a question for you in relation to what just Adnan was saying, the fact if the 0 or the 1 should exist, because you are saying that maybe a positive solution would be to create this kind of smart prisons, like, again speaking, beyond technology, like in Finland or in Sweden, in which the prisoners are treated in a good way, they have a mentor, they are relocated in society. But then my question would be, but this is the way we should go, or actually we should more fight not to have prisons? So this would be my question, because the risk is also if we do the prison like a good place, I'm also a bit, of course better than having prisons that are a bad place, but this can also justify more the existence of prisons.
Yeah, the example that Adnan gave, or the Flughafenverfahren, these are examples where I think the prison as a sociological phenomenon is connected with something that shouldn't be connected, and that has definitely more negative sides as positive aspects. So keeping people who seek asylum or who are refugees in facilities that are in fact prisons, or that sometimes are meant to be prisons even, yeah? So this is something where if you ask the question, should that exist? No, it should not exist. And if you ask the people who work in these contexts what the negative aspects and the psychological impact of such a visual or acoustic situation is for the people who are there, it's a disaster, of course. If you ask about the prison itself, can a prison be a smart place? And if we're just talking about prisons as the place where officially, official state fair, just procedure came to the conclusion that you have to be locked away for a certain time. Even this can be disputed, but if you have to create a place separate from society where people are kept, can these be smart areas, smart places? When I try to compare this worldwide or in preparing for the conference, I really was fascinated by the data that comes from the Nordic countries. When you really take this point of resocialization, when you take that serious, when you really want to support people in being able to get back and fill up deficits that they might have in the situation that they want to live together in peace and harmony in a society, then a smart prison is a place where you can learn. A smart prison is a place where you can rebalance a situation that was out of balance before. But again, the psychological part plays, and the human factor, that plays the important role. Though the smartness itself, on a technical ground, I don't think that this is something that will help us, and I'm rather afraid that if you add too much tech into a situation that is limited in resources already, then the lack of resources will be compensated by too much tech. So if you want to add technical, smart technical things into a prison, you really have to have smart people who deal with that and a sufficient resource in which that can work. So tech itself is definitely not a solution.
Thank you. And I think now is the moment to open to the public for questions. Somebody has a question? Or in between, do we have something from the online? I see a hand there, yes. First there and then you, okay.
for your contributions. I have two questions. One is a direct response to Tatiana, because you seem to be very decided that you're against prisons. So my question is, what is your suggestion, your alternative? For example, I mean, if there is crime, murder, rape, things, what should happen with these people?
I don't think I want to go into that.
But it's a provocation, so you have to be prepared.
But I think also is not. Next time we can do a panel with me in which I speak about these things, and yeah, I mean it's too complex discourse to have it. I mean, what is of course is very difficult to say prison should not exist, but for sure you should say prisons should not exist in the way exist now. So, I mean...
I think it's a good starting point for a discussion. The question is, when are we going to have that?
But also, I'm not so sure prison should exist in general. But okay, this becomes complex, but I don't want to take the stage.
So my question was to Adnan, because at one point you mentioned how much this city or whoever had to pay for the room, which was much more than a regular place to live would have cost, and this kind of pointed to the direction of business. Somebody is making business with this vessel, with prisons in general, and I think that was an aspect which was not yet, but which didn't come out very clearly yet, because I think that's a very important aspect of prisons, that they are commercial enterprises. And I don't know if anyone wants to say something about that at this point. Or is it too complex as well?
Definitely. I'm not... I'm also very keen on this aspect, and very interesting to look into all the structure from the perspective of the business. And as I understand, if I'm looking at, sometimes when I read newspaper, I always look how much does it cost, and then I'm trying to make the relation to my experience with BB facilities, and often it is the sums are just like so huge and so unnatural. Let put it that way. That I think that this whole system has some systematic background, and as I was in New York 2 weeks ago, I also have heard that in New York they are going to build the biggest prison on Manhattan, which is going to be a skyscraper. So it must be very profitable thing if they are using that location to create a skyscraper prison. But I think we need people to elaborate more on that.
You should speak only with the mic, because we have the online scene. But let's go to the next question.
I was thinking that offshore detentions has an old story. Like if you think at Cayenne in French Guiana, if you think at St. Helens where Napoleon was brought, you always need it. And we had in Italy Ventotene where the anti-fascists were brought, in an island somewhere separated. So where this thing changed, when the boats start to be more profitable, maybe it's the tourists part that made those islands more profitable as a tourist places. Where is the difference? When it comes that island went out of fashion in this business.
Who wants to answer?
I don't know. Very simple. I don't know when that started. I know from a technical perspective, I guess it's easier to keep a boat safe or to ensure security and safety for the people on the boat. But your example of the child who got hurt, of course, it's obvious. But if you misuse a boat as a facility, but just on a security perspective, maybe this is one of the reasons that boats came in place. You say, okay, we really have a separate place here, and it's difficult to reach, and it's difficult to attack, and it's more difficult to sabotage. But I'm swimming in the open blue here. I'm not a technical person who tries to keep people locked up. But this is my explanation where boats come in place. Well, I don't know.
Maybe also because you can relocate it. So, and this the moment. I mean, this perspective of if you don't need it, just move it away. And you can't do it with Alcatraz. So you have, in case of Alcatraz, you have problematic ruins. So in the case of these facilities, you have no traces at all.
And also from the boats that I saw in the films here so far, they look so harmless. Yeah, it's just a boat. So you can easily oversee it. Whereas a detention center with all these barbed wires and so this is a heavy visual impact, and I guess it's very difficult to find a place when you will want to build a new facility, and it's easier to just have a slim boat in the harbor, and that's one of many. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to have one question from the online audience because we are unfortunately out of time. How much do we still have? 2 minutes? Okay, then the online audience.
I will just pick one for Jens and also if not done one.
You should bring the mic closer to your mouth.
Yeah? So one for Jens, and also if Adnan wants to jump in, it will be great. So it is very loud today, the case of 41 bis in Italy, which is a special, very repressive detention center settled to totally isolate mafia people for clear reasons. However, this place is very inhuman. So what is the limit between the security of the state and the rights of one person in that?
This answer to Cornelia.
Yeah, this goes back to legal theory. So really, you have in the 70s in Germany, I give that as an example. The state argued it is okay. We just have a special relationship, eine besondere. What was the terminology? It was a special relationship between the state and the prisoner, and that's enough for us as the state to intervene into your legal sphere, to limit your rights. And it was the Constitutional Court in the 70s that said, no, you must set up a set of proper rules if you want to interfere into the rights of people and if you want to limit the rights. So someone who is in prison still is a human being. Yeah? And what we see on so many levels is limiting all kinds of sets of rights for the people. I'll give you a final example from Germany as well. It's working in prisons. So we have an industry of forced labor in German prisons. People have to work. They have to work. Yeah. And the hourly fee or the salary, quote unquote, that you get is somewhere between €1 and €3. And you are not allowed to have to pay into the pension system, for example, and you are not allowed to organize yourself in unions. So it's a set of limitation of all kinds of rights and of all kinds of freedoms. And it was the Constitutional Court that made it very clear you have to have a law at least that can be challenged and that can be proved to guide this intervention of the state into the individual rights. So where's the limit? It needs to be made as fair as possible and as transparent as possible. And of course, you cannot negotiate. You cannot say, because you did something so bad, I intervene even more into your personal sphere. No, no, if you're a prisoner, you're a prisoner. That's it. And it doesn't really matter why you are in prison, but you must be treated as a human being in prison. And that's, that comes along with dignity and with rights.
Thank you. And so we are now officially out of time. So I would like to thank Adnan and Jens. Thank you so much. And also to Sean for his video contribution. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
We have now a break of 20 minutes, and then we will start with the video essay Trace by Fiamma Montezemolo, and also with the panel Are Algorithms and Borders the New Jailer? So we will go more into the technological aspects. Thank you.